Hi, I'm Emily. I'll be your storyteller today. Many of you use these stories to fall asleep. So before we begin, take a moment to like the video and subscribe. Also, where are you watching from, and what time is it there? Now get comfortable. Close your eyes and let the sound of the rain guide you into the story. The world, for me, truly existed on celluloid, in the tangible, fragile strips of history that I so carefully handled each day. As a newly graduated film archivist, my life was a quiet rebellion against the ephemeral nature of the digital age. I found solace in the scent of old film stock, in the mechanical whir of a splicer, in the flickering images that held forgotten moments captive. On a dreary, rain-swept Saturday, that passion led me, as it often did, to the sprawling, chaotic grounds of the Oakhaven City Flea Market, a place where such lost histories often washed ashore. The market was a vast, open-air cathedral of forgotten things, its long aisles a testament to countless lives, loves, and losses. The persistent drizzle had thinned the usual crowds, leaving only the most dedicated hunters like myself to wander among the tables laden with tarnished silver, chipped porcelain, and mountains of dusty leather-bound books. The air was thick, with the scent of wet canvas, damp earth, and the sweet, almost funereal perfume of decay, an aroma I found strangely comforting, almost nostalgic. I moved slowly between the stalls, my eyes scanning for hidden treasures, for that one small object that whispered a story no one else was listening to. My fingers would trail over worn wooden boxes, faded photographs of smiling, nameless families, and the intricate metalwork of objects whose purpose had been lost to time. Each item was a silent echo, a fragment of a life, and I, in my own quiet way, was their archivist, their listener. My search, however, was for something more specific today. A piece of old projection equipment, a personal project to restore, to understand from the inside out. I had almost given up hope, the rain beginning to seep through my worn coat, when I saw it, tucked away at the back of a particularly cluttered, neglected stall, half hidden beneath a pile of yellowed, musty newspapers. It was an old, beautiful, but undeniably forlorn 8mm film projector. Its casing was a sturdy dark metal, its lens clouded with grime, its elegant chrome details tarnished with age and neglect. It possessed a quiet dignity, a sense of quality craftsmanship from a bygone era, and beside it, as if its eternal companion, sat a small, round metal film tin, its surface almost entirely obscured by a delicate lacework of rust. An intense, almost magnetic pull emanated from the set, a feeling that I had not just found something, but that it, in some strange way, had been waiting for me. The stall owner, a grizzled, uninterested man huddled under a makeshift tarp, barely glanced up as I approached. He seemed oblivious to the potential treasure he possessed, buried under a mountain of cheap trinkets and worthless bric-a-brac. His eyes, when they briefly met mine, were clouded, distant, holding no spark of interest, no curiosity about the objects he was selling, or the person who was now so intently focused on them. "The projector?" he grunted when I inquired, his voice a gravelly rasp. "Don't know if it even works. Found it in an old estate clearance up in the attic. The films were with it." He nudged the rusted tin with a grimy finger. "Probably just some old family memories. Faded things. You can have the lot for $20. It was a pittance for such a beautiful piece of equipment, a price that spoke of his complete and utter disinterest. The transaction was brief, impersonal. I paid him the crumpled bills, my hands trembling slightly with excitement. As I lifted the projector, its weight solid and reassuring, and tucked the rusted tin of films under my arm, I felt a strange, almost proprietary thrill. These were mine. Now their secrets, their stories, their forgotten moments, all entrusted to me. Their new archivist, their new keeper. The rain seemed to lessen slightly as I made my way back through the market, as if the city itself approved of my rescue mission. Back in my small, cozy apartment, a haven of books and quiet order against the city's gray, weeping melancholy, I set my new treasures down on my workbench with a feeling of reverence. The space was filled with the familiar, comforting scent of old paper and my own brewed tea. Carefully, lovingly, I began the meticulous process of cleaning the projector. Each wipe of the soft cloth a gentle caress, each polished piece of chrome a small victory against decades of neglect and forgotten time. The machine was a marvel of mid-century engineering, its mechanics surprisingly intact beneath the layers of dust and grime. As I worked, cleaning the lens, oiling the gears, checking the bulb, I felt a profound connection to it, to the unknown hands that had once threaded film through its intricate pathways, to the unseen family whose lives it had once illuminated, on a now-forgotten living room wall. It was a tangible piece of history, a vessel of memory. Finally, the projector was ready. The tin of films was more difficult to open, its rusted lid resisting my efforts, but it finally gave way with a low, groaning screech. Inside, nestled together, were a dozen small metal reels of 8mm film, all unlabeled, all silent, their contents a complete and utter mystery. I chose one at random, my heart quickening with the anticipation of discovery, the thrill of peering into a life not my own. With practiced ease, I threaded the brittle celluloid strip through the projector's gate, aimed the lens at the largest, blankest white wall in my living room, and dimmed the lights. The rain outside had softened to a gentle, hypnotic patter against the window panes. I flipped the switch. The projector whirred to life, a comforting mechanical sound, and after a moment of flickering leader tape, an image, grainy and silent, bloomed on my wall. It was a family picnic, sometime in the 1950s, judging by the clothes, and the vintage automobile parked in the background. A smiling man, a woman in a pretty summer dress, and two small children, a boy and a girl, laughing as they chased a ball across a sun-drenched, impossibly green lawn. The footage was amateurish, shaky in places, yet it possessed a raw, unfiltered intimacy, a sense of pure, uncomplicated happiness that was almost heartbreaking in its simple beauty. As I watched, a strange, immersive quality to the projection began to take hold. The flickering image on my wall seemed to become more than just light and shadow. It felt like a window. I could almost feel the warmth of that long-forgotten summer sun on my skin, almost smell the sweet, cloying scent of honeysuckle from a nearby hedge, almost hear the distant, happy shouts of the children, their laughter echoing across the decades. The film was short, only a few minutes long, and it ended abruptly. The idyllic scene replaced by the bright, flickering white of the end leader, then darkness. I sat there for a long moment in the quiet of my apartment. The projectors were slowly winding down, the spell of the film gradually receding, leaving me with a profound sense of melancholy, a nostalgia for a life I had never lived, for a happiness I had only witnessed as a silent, spectral guest. It was as I stood up, stretching, that I first noticed it. A faint, unfamiliar scent in the air, not of honeysuckle, but of freshly cut grass. A smell that had no business being in my third-floor city apartment on a rainy autumn night. And then, my eyes fell upon the small oval rug in the center of my living room, the very spot where the image of the family's picnic blanket had been projected. There, on the light-colored weave of the rug, was a small, distinct, and utterly impossible patch of damp green discoloration. A grass stain. I knelt, my heart pounding, and touched it with a trembling finger. It was real. It was damp. And it smelled, undeniably, of freshly crushed grass, of summer earth, of the sun-drenched picnic that had existed only as a flickering image on my wall moments before. My mind reeled, trying to find a logical explanation, a rational cause for this impossible physical residue. Had I tracked it in on my shoes? No, I had been inside for hours. Was it a pre-existing stain I had simply never noticed? Impossible. I knew every inch of this rug, every flaw. This was new. This was from the film. The projector hadn't just shown me a memory. It had, in some small, terrifying way, brought a piece of it into my world. I looked back at the projector, now silent on my workbench, at the rusted tin containing its 11 remaining mysteries. My earlier excitement, my archivist's thrill of discovery, had curdled into a new, far more unsettling emotion, a profound, creeping dread. What other memories were held captive on those silent, unlabeled reels? And what else might bleed through from their forgotten world into mine? The rain outside continued to fall, a soft, steady weeping. For 3 days, the inexplicable grass stain on my rug remained a silent, damning testament to an impossible event. I scrubbed at it, but it would not fade. A small, vibrant green patch of another world's summer imprinted upon my own reality. I tried to rationalize it, to conjure logical explanations. A leaking pen, a spilled drink, a trick of the light. But my archivist's mind, trained in the sober assessment of facts, could find no plausible cause. The old 8mm projector sat silently on my workbench, a beautiful, enigmatic machine that now held a faint, almost imperceptible aura of menace. The rusted tin of unlabeled films exerted a powerful, almost gravitational pull. A part of me, the rational, sensible part, screamed to put it away, to take the projector back to the flea market, to forget the entire unsettling episode. But a larger, more insistent part, the part that had dedicated its life to uncovering forgotten stories, was consumed with a burning curiosity. What other memories were held captive on those small celluloid reels? What other impossible traces might they leave behind? My fear warred with my fascination, a tumultuous, silent battle waged in the quiet confines of my apartment as the rain continued its soft, mournful drumming against the window panes. I spent hours researching the projectors, make and model online, searching for any mention of strange properties, of similar impossible occurrences. I found nothing but mundane technical specifications and nostalgic posts from fellow analog enthusiasts. The mystery, it seemed, was mine alone to unravel. On the 4th night, the curiosity finally won. With a sense of both dread and an irresistible, scholarly excitement, I chose another reel from the rusted tin, its weight small and unassuming in my hand. I threaded the film, my movements precise, almost ritualistic, and once more aimed the projector at the clean white expanse of my living room wall. The familiar, comforting whir of the motor filled the room as the flickering light bloomed into life, pulling me back into its silent, grainy world. This time, the scene was a child's birthday party. The same family from the picnic was gathered, in a warmly lit, wood-paneled room, their faces beaming with joy. The little girl, her hair in pigtails, sat before a cake ablaze with candles, her eyes wide with delight. The silent footage was filled with laughter, with the happy chaos of unwrapped presents, of party games, of a simple, beautiful moment of familial love, perfectly preserved in flickering shades of faded color. Once again, the immersive quality of the projection was astounding, almost overwhelming. As the little girl blew out her candles, her cheeks puffed in silent effort, I could smell it. The distinct, sweet, waxy scent of burning birthday candles. So real, so vivid, it made my eyes water with an unbidden nostalgia. It was a scent from my own distant childhood, a phantom aroma that had no place in my solitary, adult apartment. Then, as the family in the film began to sing what I could only assume was "Happy Birthday," their mouths open in silent, joyous unison, I heard it, a faint, tinny, almost ethereal melody, like music from a distant, old-fashioned radio, seemed to drift on the air. It was the tune of the song, barely audible, a ghostly chorus accompanying the silent figures on my wall. It was impossible, beautiful, and utterly terrifying. The film ended, and the sounds and scents faded with the light, leaving me once again in the heavy silence of my apartment, my heart pounding. The experience had been even more intense, more sensorially complete than the first. The projector was not just creating an image, it was creating an atmosphere, a complete, multi-sensory echo of a moment long since passed into history. It was a miracle, and it was a violation. My eyes scanned the room, searching for the inevitable, impossible proof. It didn't take long to find. There, on the wooden floor, directly beneath where the image of the birthday cake had flickered on the wall, were a few, tiny, almost invisible drops of hardened colored wax. I knelt, touching one with a trembling fingertip. It was real. Melted wax from a child's birthday party 50 or 60 years ago. The sensory bleed was not just an echo, it was a physical transference. This new evidence, so small yet so profound, solidified my unease into a more concrete fear. This was not a benign magic. It was a blurring of realities, a breaking of fundamental laws. The initial wonder, the archivist's thrill of discovery, was being rapidly eclipsed by a sense of having stumbled upon something ancient, powerful, and utterly beyond my comprehension. Something that perhaps should have remained lost. Driven by my ingrained need to catalog, to understand, I started a new journal, dedicating it solely to what I now called the Holloway Projector, having glimpsed the family's name on a birthday banner in the second film. I meticulously documented the films, the sensory bleed-through, the impossible physical traces left behind. It was an archivist's attempt to impose order on a phenomenon that defied all logical categorization, a fragile defense against the encroaching unreality. I called Clara, my oldest friend, her pragmatism a quality I desperately needed, even if I knew she wouldn't believe me. I tried to explain, my voice tight with a suppressed hysteria, about the scent of cake, the ghostly music, the impossible drops of wax on my floor. I could hear the strained patience in her voice, the gentle concern reserved for a friend one believes is succumbing to stress. "Alice," she said, her voice a careful, soothing balm. "You've been working so hard. You're alone in that apartment most nights. Don't you think you might be a little overtired?" It's amazing what the mind can conjure when it's exhausted. Maybe you just need to step away from all that old dusty stuff for a while, get some fresh air. Her rationalizations, however well meant, only made me feel more isolated, more alone with my terrifying tangible proof. Her disbelief, though painful, spurred me onward. I had to know more. I had to see the pattern, if there was one. Later that night, against my better judgment, driven by a need for more data, more evidence, I threaded a third reel of film into the projector. The familiar whir filled the room, and a new scene bloomed on the wall. The Holloway family, this time at a windswept, overcast beach. The children were building a sandcastle, the parents watching from a blanket. But the atmosphere was different. The earlier, easy joy replaced by a subtle, almost imperceptible tension. The smiles seemed a little strained, a little forced. The film quality itself seemed darker, the grain more pronounced, as if the very air around them was heavier. I leaned forward, my brow furrowed, a sense of foreboding settling over me. Then I saw it, in a wide shot of the family, as the mother turned to look back towards the dunes behind them. Her smile momentarily vanished, replaced by a fleeting, almost subliminal expression of pure, unadulterated fear. Her eyes darted nervously towards something off camera, something that was clearly not part of their family outing. The moment was gone in a fraction of a second, her cheerful facade quickly restored, but I had seen it. The film continued with its charade of family fun, but the illusion was shattered. That single unguarded expression of terror had recontextualized everything. The happy memories were a lie, or at least not the whole truth. Something was wrong in their world. Something was watching them, something that had instilled in the mother a deep, hidden dread. The rain outside my window began to fall harder, a sudden squall lashing against the glass. The film ended, leaving not the scent of salt water or the sound of waves, but a profound, chilling silence in my apartment. A silence filled with a new, more specific kind of fear. The projector was not just a window into a family's past happiness. It was a chronicle of their dawning nightmare. The sensory bleed-through was not just a curious phenomenon. It was a symptom of a reality that was deeply, terrifyingly unwell. My initial wonder at this strange, magical artifact was now completely gone, replaced by a cold, sharp dread. These were not just forgotten home movies. They were a narrative, a story unfolding in fragmented, silent chapters, and I had the horrifying suspicion that it was a story that did not end well. The question now was no longer what these films were, but what was happening in them, and what it meant for me, their sole, terrified viewer. The fleeting image of the mother's terrified glance on the beach had transformed my project from a curious anomaly into an unfolding, silent drama. My initial wonder had been replaced by a grim, forensic fascination. I was no longer just a passive viewer of lost memories. I was an investigator, a chronologist of a family's descent into some unknown, encroaching dread. The rain outside my window was a constant, weeping companion to my obsessive late-night viewings, each drop a tiny tick of a clock I couldn't see. I spent the next 2 nights rewatching the first happy films, The Picnic, The Birthday Party, but with a new, critical eye. And now, armed with the knowledge of what was to come, I saw them. The subtle tells, the cracks in their joyful facade. The father's smile in the picnic footage, which I had first seen as warm, now looked strained, his eyes occasionally darting towards the dark tree line beyond the sun-drenched lawn. The mother's laughter at the birthday party seemed a fraction too bright, her hands trembling almost imperceptibly as she cut the cake. These were not just home movies. They were performances, a desperate attempt to project an image of normalcy against a backdrop of rising fear. The happiness was real, perhaps, but it was fragile, brittle, threatened by something just beyond the frame, something the shaky amateur camera never quite managed to capture, or perhaps deliberately avoided. The sweet phantom scents these films left behind now seemed less like a magical echo, and more like a cloying, desperate perfume meant to mask a deeper, more unsettling odor of decay. With a sense of profound trepidation, I threaded a new reel onto the projector, one I hadn't yet watched, knowing it would likely pull me further down the rabbit hole of the Holloway family's quiet terror. The familiar whir of the motor filled the room, the flickering light blooming on my wall, and a new scene emerged from the grainy, silent depths of the celluloid. This film was set indoors, in what appeared to be the family's living room. The Maig's festive decorations of the birthday party were gone, replaced by a somber, claustrophobic atmosphere. The father paced restlessly before a window, his face a mask of grim anxiety. The mother sat hunched in an armchair, her hands clasped tightly. In her lap, her gaze fixed on something beyond the camera's view. The two children played quietly on the floor with wooden blocks, their usual boisterous energy completely absent, as if they too sensed the oppressive weight in the room. The tension was palpable, a silent argument, a shared dread that permeated every frame. There were no smiles here, no laughter. The family was clearly trapped, not just by the walls of their home, but by an unseen, unnamed fear that had seeped into the very fabric of their lives. They were prisoners, and the camera was their silent, unblinking warden, dutifully recording their slow, inexorable descent. And then, for the first time, I saw it clearly. In the background of a shot focused on the mother's worried face, in a darkened corner of the room behind a tall, imposing bookshelf, was a shadow. It was not a natural shadow cast by the furniture or the room's lighting. It was a tall, unnaturally, thin and disturbingly distinct silhouette, a vertical slash of absolute blackness that seemed to drink the light around it. My heart leapt into my throat. The shadow was motionless, yet it possessed a terrifying, sentient presence. It was a watcher, a silent observer within their home, its form indistinct yet undeniably there, a stark black stain on the cozy domesticity of the scene. I frantically checked my own living room, my gaze darting into the corners, but I was alone. The shadow existed only on the film, a captured specter from half a century ago. As I stared, mesmerized and horrified, the mother in the film turned her head slightly, her eyes widening in terror as she glanced towards that same darkened corner. She had seen it too. Her fear was not of something outside the window, but of this silent, dark presence that was inside the room with them, a fact that made the scene infinitely more terrifying. The camera then abruptly, shakily, panned away, as if the person holding it couldn't bear to look any longer. The film ended a few moments later, cutting to the flickering white of the leader tape. I sat in the darkness. The projectors were slowing, the only sound the soft patter of the rain outside. But this time, the sensory bleed-through was not a scent, not a sound. It was a feeling. A profound, invasive, bone-deep chill filled my apartment, accompanied by the faint, sharp smell of ozone, the scent of electrical discharge, of something ancient and unnatural disturbing the very air. This was no longer a mystery to be solved from a safe academic distance. The barrier between viewer and viewed between my reality and the Holloway's recorded nightmare was becoming dangerously, terrifyingly thin. The entity that had haunted them, that had manifested as a silent, watching shadow in their home, was now manifesting as a palpable, chilling presence in mine. The projector was a bridge, and I was willingly, foolishly, walking across it each time I turned it on. Desperate for a different perspective, for a technical explanation that might yet save me from the encroaching madness, I called Professor Albright, my old mentor from the film archiving program. He was a man who lived and breathed celluloid, who understood the strange chemical properties, the quirks of light and shadow, better than anyone I knew. I described the shadow as a film anomaly, a potential light leak or chemical degradation on the film stock. He listened patiently, his voice a comforting, scholarly rumble on the other end of the line. "It's possible, Alice," he said thoughtfully. "Old 8mm stock can be notoriously unstable. Chemical fogging or reticulation can create all sorts of strange, shadow-like artifacts. It's quite common, really." His words were a temporary balm, a lifeline back to the rational, scientific world I so desperately missed. "But," he continued, a new, more hesitant note in his voice, "there are also other theories. Old folklore from the early days of photography. Tales of spirit photography, of cameras that were believed to capture more than just light. Some believed that intense emotional states, particularly fear or grief, could somehow imprint themselves directly onto the emulsion, like a psychic photograph." His words, meant perhaps as a historical curiosity, sent a fresh wave of dread through me. "A psychic photograph?" I repeated, my voice barely a whisper. "Indeed," he confirmed. "Nonsense, of course, from a scientific perspective, but a fascinating intersection of technology and superstition. The belief that a camera could not just record a memory, but steal a piece of the soul, that it could become a window to other realms." His words, intended or not, had given my terror a new, chilling name. The projector wasn't just a window to the past, it was a window to another realm, a realm of fear and sorrow, and the shadow was its native inhabitant. After ending the call, my hands trembling, I knew I had to look at the footage again, to examine it with a new, more terrified scrutiny. Loaded the clip onto my computer, isolating the frames where the shadow was visible, magnifying the image until the film grain was like a field of shifting sand. There it was, the tall, thin slash of absolute blackness in the corner of the Holloway's living room. It was static, unmoving, just as I remembered, a silent, menacing fixture in their recorded despair. But then, as I looped the short, 2-second clip, watching it over and over, my eyes straining against the screen, I saw it. Or rather, I felt I saw it. A flicker of movement so subtle I thought I had imagined it. I slowed the playback down, frame by agonizing frame. And there, in a single horrifying instant, a single frame between two others, the shadow moved. It wasn't much. Just a slight, almost imperceptible shift. A subtle twisting, as if it were turning its unseen head to look directly out of the screen, directly at the camera, directly at me. The watcher had become aware of the watcher. The artifact was not just an imprint of fear, it was the source of it, an intelligent, aware entity, trapped on celluloid, yet somehow, now, able to perceive the one who was viewing it. A scream, raw and ragged, tore from my throat. I threw myself back from the desk, my chair crashing against the wall. The friendly, familiar interface of my computer now seemed like a hostile, haunted portal. The shadow knew I was there. It had seen me. And the projector, that beautiful, cursed machine, was the bridge that connected its world of silent, grainy terror to my own. The rain outside lashed my window, a furious, triumphant roar. The single horrifying frame of the moving shadow had transformed the projector from a curious portal into a two-way mirror, and the entity on the other side was now terrifyingly aware of my gaze. My apartment, once a sanctuary, now felt like an observation room, the projector a malevolent eye waiting to be opened. For several days I avoided it completely, leaving the rusted tin of films untouched, a small monument to my escalating fear. But its presence was a constant, silent hum in my consciousness, a mystery that demanded to be solved, regardless of the consequences. During those days of fearful avoidance, the haunting did not cease. It simply became more subtle, more insidious. I would catch fleeting shadows in my own peripheral vision, dark shapes that mimicked the unnatural thinness of the one in the film. The faint scent of ozone would return at odd moments, a sharp, metallic tang in the air. Once, I awoke in the dead of night to the soft, unmistakable whir of the projector's motor, though I knew, with absolute certainty, that it was unplugged from the wall. The fear was a constant cold knot in my stomach, but beneath it, a new, more powerful emotion was beginning to take root. A profound empathy for the Holloway family. They were not just grainy figures in a forgotten home movie. They were real people, trapped in a waking nightmare that I was now witnessing. A nightmare that seemed to be bleeding into my own. I felt a growing, almost unbearable responsibility to see their story through to its end, to understand what had befallen them. With a sense of grim resolve, I finally threaded a new reel onto the projector, my hand steady despite the frantic beating of my heart. The familiar flicker bloomed on my wall, and the Holloway family returned. The scene was their home again, but the atmosphere had deteriorated drastically. The cozy living room from the previous film was now cluttered, disheveled. A blanket was tacked crudely over the main window, and the family themselves looked thin, exhausted, their eyes wide with a sleepless, hunted terror. They moved through, their home like ghosts, their interactions imbued with a hushed, desperate urgency. The father clutched a heavy iron crucifix in his hand, his gaze constantly darting towards the darkened corners of the room. The mother held her two children close, her arms a fragile barricade against some unseen threat. Their silent, shared terror was a palpable thing, a suffocating blanket that reached out from the screen and settled upon me in my small, quiet apartment. And the shadows. They were no longer a single lurking presence in a forgotten corner. Now, there were more. I saw them in the background of almost every shot, indistinct, tall, thin figures, standing motionless in doorways, peering from behind furniture, their forms like heat haze, like distortions in the very fabric of the film. They were the watchers, a silent, ever-present audience to the family's slow, agonizing unraveling. Their forms were clearer now, no longer dismissible as film grain or chemical flaws. They possessed a deliberate, malevolent stillness, their presence a constant, oppressive weight on the trapped family. In one particularly chilling shot, as the little girl cried silently in her mother's arms, I could see one of the watchers in the hallway behind them, its form seeming to lean forward slightly, as if straining to listen, to drink in her despair. The rain outside my own window began to fall harder, a mournful, weeping sound that seemed to synchronize with the silent sorrow on the screen. The Watchers were not just observing, they were tormenting, their very presence a form of psychological warfare, slowly eroding the family's hope, their sanity. The cozy suburban home had become a pressure cooker of fear, a prison where the walls themselves seemed to be imbued with the Watcher's silent, predatory intent. After this film ended, the sensory bleed-through was not of grass or cake, but of something far more unsettling. The air in my apartment became thick with the faint, almost imperceptible scent of human fear, a cold, metallic tang like adrenaline and sweat. And with it came an overwhelming feeling of claustrophobia, a sense of being trapped, cornered, with no hope of escape. It was the emotional residue of the Holloway family, a direct transference of their terror into my own space. This was no longer just a haunting. It was an infection, a psychic contagion spreading through the projector's lens, using me as its new host. I felt a surge of panic, a desperate urge to smash the projector, to burn the films, to rid myself of this curse. But the image of the Holloway family, their silent, terrified faces, their shared ordeal, held me back. I couldn't abandon them. Not now. Not when I was the only one who knew their story. I called Clara, my voice tight, strained. I didn't even try to explain the details this time, only the raw, overwhelming fear. Clara, I was wrong, I choked out. It's not just my imagination. Something is terribly wrong here. I'm scared. Her voice on the other end was filled with a new, more profound concern. The flimsy veil of my artistic temperament had been torn away, leaving only my raw, undisguised terror. Alice, listen to me, she said, her voice firm, urgent. I'm coming over. Now. Don't touch that projector. Don't watch any more of those films. Just sit tight. Lock your door. I'll be there as soon as I can. Her words were a small, fragile lifeline. But even as she spoke, I knew it was likely futile. What could she do against an enemy that existed on celluloid, that traveled as light and shadow? While I waited, a morbid, almost self-destructive compulsion drove me to watch the next reel. I had to know what happened next. I had to see. The scene that appeared on my wall was the final, desperate moments from within the Holloway home. The father was frantically nailing boards over the windows. The mother huddled with the children in a corner, her face a mask of utter, soul-shattering despair. The Watchers were closer now, their shadowy forms encroaching into the very center of the room. Then, the mother looked up, her gaze finding the lens of the camera. Her expression shifted from terror to a look of desperate, urgent appeal. She looked directly at me across the decades, across the boundary of realities, her eyes pleading. Her mouth formed a single silent word, a word I could read clearly on her trembling lips, a word that ripped through my heart with the force of a physical blow. Run. In the instant she formed the word, one of the shadowy Watchers in the background lunged forward with an impossible fluid speed, its form a blur of pure blackness. It moved towards the mother, towards the camera, and then the film cut out. A violent, jarring end. The celluloid strip itself physically snapped, leaving only the bright, empty, flickering white light of the projector bulb burning on my wall. A scream, raw and ragged, finally escaped my own throat. The mother's desperate warning, her final act, had been for me, the future viewer, the next victim. She hadn't been pleading for her own family's rescue. She had been trying to save mine. The Watchers were not just content to torment. They were actively hostile, capable of a violence that could seemingly break the very fabric of the recorded image. The projector whirred, its empty white light a pitiless, unblinking eye. The silent plea, "Run," echoed in my mind, a frantic, ghostly command. The barrier between our worlds, between my role as Archivist and my new role as a participant in their horror, had been irrevocably, terrifyingly shattered. The Watchers knew I was here. They knew I had seen their attack, and now, I feared, their patient observation was about to end. The projector bulb burned with a pitiless, white-hot intensity, casting a blank, flickering rectangle onto my wall, an empty screen where the mother's desperate, silent plea to run had been moments before. The snapped celluloid whirred, a sound like a tiny, broken bone, until the reel ran out, plunging the room into a sudden, profound silence, broken only by the furious lashing of rain against the window and the frantic, ragged sound of my own breathing. I was paralyzed, the ghostly warning a scream in my mind. Clara was on her way. The thought, which should have been a comfort, was now a new source of terror. What good was her pragmatic skepticism against something that could reach across decades, that could communicate through the silent language of film? I had invited her into this, into my haunted space, and the thought of her arriving, of bringing her bright, rational presence into this den of encroaching shadows, filled me with a desperate, protective dread. I spent the next hour pacing the confines of my small apartment like a caged animal, too terrified to touch the projector, too afraid to look at the innocuous tin of films that now seemed to hold a dozen more potential horrors. Every shadow seemed to writhe with the memory of the Watchers, every creak of the old building's floorboards a footstep in the hall. The air was thick with the scent of ozone and fear, a tangible residue of the film's violent, abrupt conclusion. Sleep was an impossibility. I sat huddled in an armchair, wrapped in a blanket, every light in the apartment blazing, staring at my front door, waiting for either Clara's familiar knock or the terrifying scratching sound of something else trying to get in. The night stretched on, an eternity of listening, of waiting. The city's mournful, rain-swept sounds a constant, unsettling lullaby. The projector sat on my workbench, a silent, squat idol, its lens a dark, unblinking eye. As the first, faint, gray light of a miserable dawn began to filter through the windows, exhaustion finally began to win its war against my terror. The immediate heart-pounding fear had subsided, leaving behind a cold, hard certainty. The barrier between my world and the Holloway's recorded nightmare was broken. The Watchers were not confined to celluloid. The mother's warning was not just a plea. It was a statement of imminent, physical danger. Clara arrived shortly after dawn, her face etched with a concern that deepened into alarm as she saw my state. Pale, trembling, my eyes wide with a sleepless, haunted terror. "Alice," she breathed, stepping inside and closing the door against the persistent drizzle. "My God, what happened? You look like you've seen a ghost." I let out a choked, humorless laugh. "Ghosts, Clara," I whispered, "would be a welcome relief." Before I could even begin to explain the full, terrifying extent of my night's ordeal, her gaze fell upon my apartment door, which I had just closed behind her. Her expression shifted from concern to bewildered disbelief. "Alice," she said, her voice tight, "what happened to your door?" I turned, my heart sinking, though I already knew what I would see. There, on the outside of my heavy wooden door, were 3 deep parallel gouges, running from the top of the door to the bottom. The wood was splintered, raw, as if a large predatory animal with immense claws had tried to tear its way through. They hadn't been there yesterday. They were a physical, undeniable testament to a nocturnal visitor, a brutal confirmation that the entity from the film was no longer just an echo, no longer just a shadow in a reflection. I don't know. I lied weakly, not yet ready to share the full, impossible truth. I didn't hear anything. But we both knew that was impossible. The marks were too deep, too violent, to have been made without a sound. Clara ran her fingers over the splintered wood, a shiver running through her. "This isn't just vandalism, Alice," she said, her voice barely a whisper. "This is aggressive, vicious." The physical proof, the undeniable reality of those scratches, shattered her skepticism in a way my frantic words never could. She looked at me, then at the projector on my workbench, her eyes wide with a dawning, horrified understanding. The strange phenomena I had been describing to her, which she had dismissed as stress and imagination, were suddenly, terrifyingly, real. The threat had crossed over. It was in that moment of shared, terrified silence that I finally understood the projector's true nature. It was not just a window, not just a bridge. It was a portal, a machine designed to superimpose one reality onto another, and with each viewing, the barrier between them grew thinner, more porous, until things could finally, physically, break through. The sensory bleed-through, the grass stain, the wax, had just been the prelude, the first small leaks in a rapidly crumbling dam. The scratch marks on my door were the first major breach, a clear sign that the watchers were no longer content to simply observe from within their celluloid prison. They were testing the boundaries, clawing at the walls of my world, seeking entry. And the mother's warning to run was not just about me fleeing. It was a desperate plea for me to stop the projection, to close the portal before they could fully emerge. As this horrifying realization washed over me, a new sound began in the apartment. A sound that made both Clara and I freeze. It was the soft, familiar mechanical whir of the projector motor. It had started on its own. Its power cord lay coiled on the floor beside it, several feet from the nearest outlet. It was running on some unseen, impossible power source. We both turned to stare at the wall where the films were projected. It was blank, as there was no film threaded, but the projector's lamp was glowing with a faint, hungry light, casting a flickering, empty rectangle on the wall, like a waiting screen. The whirring grew louder, more insistent, and the air in the room grew colder, the scent of ozone sharp and acrid. Then, within the empty, flickering rectangle of light on the wall, a shadow began to form. It was indistinct at first, a swirling patch of darkness, but it slowly began to coalesce, to take on the familiar, unnaturally tall and thin silhouette of one of the watchers. It was no longer a fleeting glimpse in a film frame. It was manifesting, here, now, in my living room, using the projector's light as its medium. Clara let out a small, choked gasp, her hand flying to her mouth, her eyes wide with terror. This was it, the undeniable proof, the shared phenomenon that bridged the gap between my supposed madness and her rational world. We were seeing the same thing. The watcher, its form still hazy but solidifying with each passing second, seemed to turn its unseen head towards us, a silent, menacing acknowledgement. The projector whirred louder, the light on the wall pulsing, and the shadow grew darker, more defined, threatening to detach itself from the wall, to step into the room as a fully three-dimensional entity. We were no longer just watching a haunted film. The haunting had come to us, invited into my home through a cursed object I had foolishly, naively, brought back from the rain-swept stalls of a forgotten flea market. I was no longer alone in my terror, but that was of little comfort. In fact, it was worse. I had not only endangered myself, I had dragged my best friend into this waking nightmare. Her presence here, her shared fear, her belief. I couldn't help but wonder if that was what the entity wanted. Another mind, another consciousness to witness, to fear, and perhaps to feed upon. The shadow on the wall took a step forward, its movement fluid, unnatural, impossible. The time for observation, for research, for understanding, was over. The portal was open, the entity was coming through, and we were trapped in the room with it. The only sound, the frantic, terrified beating of our two hearts and the relentless mechanical whir of the memory projector. The shadowy figure on my wall, a coalescing nightmare born of light and dust, recoiled as Clara, with a strangled cry of terror, threw a heavy blanket over the whirring projector. The image vanished, the hungry light extinguished, and the menacing hum from the machine abruptly ceased. We were left in the dim, rain-swept gloom of my apartment, our ragged gasps the only sound, the air thick with the afterscent of ozone, and a terror that was now horribly, undeniably shared. The Watcher had been in the room with us. For a long moment, we stood frozen, staring at the shrouded projector as if it were a venomous snake, poised to strike again. Clara, my pragmatic, no-nonsense friend, was pale, her usual skepticism shattered, replaced by a wide-eyed horror that mirrored my own. "Alice," she whispered, her voice trembling. "What was that? What in God's name have you brought into your home?" Her fear, so raw and real, was a terrifying validation of my own experiences, confirming that I was not, in fact, losing my mind. "I don't know," I choked out, my gaze fixed on the blanket-covered machine. "I bought it at the flea market. It just looked old. Interesting." The explanation felt pathetic, ludicrous, in the face of what we had just witnessed. The projector was not just an antique, it was a conduit, a gateway, and I had foolishly, naively, invited its dark, spectral inhabitants into my world. The rain outside seemed to whisper a chorus of, "I told you so." "We can't stay here," Clara said, her voice gaining a fragile urgency. "We have to get rid of it. Take it back. We have to find the man who sold it to you. He has to know what it is." Her words, a frantic grasp for some form of action, of control, resonated with my own desperate need to do something. The thought of spending another night in this apartment, with that machine, was unbearable. The only lead we had was the uninterested, grizzled man from the rainy flea market stall. The next morning, under a sky of bruised, weeping gray clouds, we returned to the Oakhaven flea market. It was a weekday, less crowded, its usual chaotic, energy replaced by a more subdued, melancholic air. The scent of wet canvas and damp earth was a grim reminder of the day I had found the projector. We navigated the familiar aisles, my heart pounding with a nervous, desperate hope, searching for the stall, for the man who had so casually sold me a waking nightmare for $20. We found the stall, its tarp flapping listlessly in the damp breeze, but it was occupied by a different vendor, a cheerful woman selling handmade jewelry, her bright wares a jarring contrast to my dark memories of the spot. When we asked about the previous seller, the grizzled man, she just shrugged. "Oh, him? He's not a regular, just clears out old estates when they come up." Packs up and is gone by the end of the day. Haven't seen him since. Our hope plummeted. He was a ghost, a transient, as ephemeral as the images his cursed projector cast upon my wall. As we were about to turn away, defeated, the jewelry vendor added, as an afterthought. He did mention something, though. Said any of the old seeing gadgets, cameras, lanterns, things like that, from that particular estate were to be passed on to old Mr. Elias over on Chapel Street. Said Elias had a special interest in unusual optics. The phrase unusual optics sent a chill down my spine. It was a long shot, but it was the only lead we had. Chapel Street was in one of Oak Haven's oldest, most forgotten districts. A labyrinth of narrow cobblestone lanes and leaning ancient buildings. It took us an hour to find it. Elias Antiques and Optical Curiosities, a small dusty shop front, wedged between a derelict bookstore and a crumbling tenement, its windows so grimy they were almost opaque. The interior of the shop was a dimly lit, chaotic treasure trove, smelling of dust, beeswax, and old decaying leather. Every surface was piled high with antique cameras, magic lanterns, stereoscopes, brass telescopes, and strange, multifaceted lenses that distorted the room into 1,000 surreal reflections. It was a place dedicated to the history of seeing and being seen, and it felt as ancient and secretive as the city itself. A small, stooped man with thick bottle-glass spectacles that magnified his eyes to an unsettling degree emerged from behind a towering stack of books. He moved with a slow, deliberate shuffle, his gaze, though distorted by the thick lenses, seeming to miss nothing. This had to be Mr. Elias. "Can I help you, ladies?" he asked, his voice a dry, reedy whisper. "Or are you simply browse the reflections?" Clara, usually so forthright, seemed unnerved by the strange old man and the shop's oppressive atmosphere, and remained silent. I took a deep breath, my voice trembling as I explained our story. I told him about the projector, the unlabeled films, the sensory bleed-through, and finally, the shadow, the watcher, that had materialized in my apartment. I showed him a photo on my phone I had taken of the scratches on my door. Mr. Elias listened, in complete silence, his magnified eyes fixed on my face, his expression unchanging. He showed no surprise, no disbelief, only a deep, unnerving, almost weary calm. When I had finished, he simply nodded, as if I had just described the most mundane of occurrences. He took my phone and peered at the image of the scratches, his brow furrowed in concentration. "Ah," he murmured, his voice a dry rustle. "An 8mm Keystone model from the late 1940s, if I'm not mistaken. And the films from the Holloway estate, yes?" I thought as much. I declined to take this particular item. It has a reputation. His casual confirmation, his knowledge of the Holloway estate, was a fresh wave of terror. He knew. He had known all along. "Some optical devices, my dear," he continued, turning his unsettling gaze back to me, "were not designed merely to capture light. The early pioneers of photography and cinematography, some of them dabbled in more esoteric arts. They believed that a powerful lens, under the right emotional conditions, could capture more than just an image. It could capture an echo, a residue, a fragment of a soul. The projector you possess," he said, polishing his thick glasses with a corner of his dusty waistcoat, "is not just a projector. It is what some used to call a memory trap. It doesn't just play back a memory. It creates a sympathetic resonance, a temporary bridge between the world of the viewer and the world of the viewed, or rather, the trapped. The bleed-through you experienced, that was the bridge being built. His words, so calmly delivered, were the most terrifying I had ever heard. The Holloway family was not just a memory on a film. They were trapped, their reality a celluloid prison, and I had been opening the door. And the shadow, I whispered, my voice barely audible. The Watchers? Mr. Elias's expression darkened. That, he said, his voice dropping even lower, is the jailer. The entity that created the trap in the first place. It is a creature of perception, a being that feeds on the emotional energy of those it ensnares, he explained. It traps its victims in a loop of their own memories, feeding on their joy, their sorrow, and most of all, their fear. And by watching their story, by feeling for them, you have created a connection, a resonance. You have, in effect, shown the jailer a new source of nourishment, you. His explanation was a horrifying, soul-crushing clarification. I hadn't just stumbled upon a haunted object. I had voluntarily engaged with a parasitic entity and alerted it to my existence. What can I do? I pleaded. How do I stop it? Mr. Elias sighed, a sound of profound, ancient weariness. You cannot unsee what has now seen you, child, he said softly. He offered no easy solution, no magic charm to break the curse. The connection is forged through perception, he murmured, more to himself than to us. To break it would require a severing of that perception, or a conclusion to the story. He looked at me, his magnified eyes holding a flicker of what might have been pity. Every film, he whispered, must have an ending. The question is, who gets to be the director? Clara and I left his shop in a state of stunned, horrified silence, the antique dealer's riddle echoing in our minds. The rain had started again, a cold, miserable drizzle that seemed to mock our newfound, terrible knowledge. We now understood the nature of the cursed object I had brought into my home, but that understanding offered no comfort, only a deeper, more profound sense of entrapment. The Watcher had seen me, and it was hungry. We returned to my apartment from Mr. Elias's dusty, secret-filled shop, his final chilling words. Every film must have an ending. The question is, who gets to be the director? Echoing in the rain-swept silence. The city of Oakhaven, with its familiar melancholic beauty, now seemed like a thin, fragile veneer stretched over a reality far more ancient and terrifying. We now knew the truth, or at least a fragment of it. The projector was a memory trap. The Watcher was its jailer, and by watching, I had made myself known to it. Clara, her face pale, her usual pragmatic confidence shattered, insisted on staying with me. I was grateful for her presence, for the simple, grounding reality of another person in my small, increasingly hostile apartment. Yet her decision also filled me with a profound, gnawing guilt. I had dragged her into this nightmare. Her skepticism, a casualty of the impossible reality that now held us both in its grip. The projector sat on my workbench, shrouded in the blanket she had thrown over it. A sleeping monster we were both terrified to wake. Now that the entity knew we knew, now that I had sought out knowledge of its nature, the haunting shifted. The subtle, almost whimsical sensory bleed-through, the scent of grass, the taste of cake, ceased completely. It was as if the Watcher had tired of its gentle, insidious games. The phenomena that followed were more direct, more personal, and infinitely more menacing. The air in the apartment was thick with a new kind of tension, not just of being watched, but of being actively, intelligently stalked. The shadows began. They were no longer confined to the grainy frames of the Holloway family's films, but were now a feature of my own home. A tall, unnaturally thin shadow would dart past the doorway to my bedroom in my peripheral vision. A dark, indistinct shape would coalesce in a corner of the living room for a heart-stopping instant, only to dissolve the moment I turned to face it. They were fleeting, evasive, yet their presence was a constant, unnerving reminder that we were not alone. Clara saw them too, though she tried at first to deny it, to rationalize them as tricks of the light, as products of our shared, heightened state of fear. But they were too frequent, too specific in their unnerving, sentient movements. They were the watchers from the film, their forms now able to bleed into our reality, untethered from the projector, their presence a constant, silent torment that frayed our already shattered nerves. Then came the reflections. Staring at my own face in the bathroom mirror, my image would flicker for a fraction of a second, my features momentarily replaced by the pale, terrified face of Mrs. Holloway, her eyes wide with a silent, decades-old plea. Or, glancing at my reflection in the dark, rain-streaked window overlooking the city, I would see not my own face, but that of her small, sad-eyed daughter. Her expression one of profound, lost confusion. These were not just glimpses. They were invasions, violations of my very identity. The entity was showing me the fate of its previous victims, superimposing their trapped essences onto my own, a chilling suggestion of what I was to become. It was actively trying to weaken my resolve, to erode my sense of self, to make me more susceptible to its influence, to perhaps prepare me for my own absorption into its spectral collection. The whispers also returned, but they were different now, clearer, closer. They would emanate from the shrouded projector itself, even when it was unplugged, a soft, seductive murmur in the dead of night. "Just one more film, Alice," they would sigh, the voice a composite of 1,000 sorrowful echoes. "Don't you want to know how their story ends? Don't you want to help them? Just watch." It was a terrible, insidious temptation, preying on my empathy, my archivist's need for conclusion. Clara and I became prisoners in my small apartment, starting at every shadow, every sound. We tried to create a sense of normalcy, but it was a fragile, desperate charade. We covered the mirrors with towels. We left the lights on constantly. We kept the projector shrouded, a lump of silent menace in the corner of the room. But the entity's presence was pervasive, its psychological assault relentless. It didn't need darkness to manifest its dread. "What does it want from us?" Clara whispered one night, as we huddled together on the couch, the rain a constant weeping presence outside. "It wants an ending," I murmured, the words of Mr. Elias echoing in my mind. "It wants a new film. It wants my film." The terrifying truth, spoken aloud, hung in the air between us, cold and sharp as a shard of glass. The entity was trying to break me down, to make me so desperate for answers, for an end to the torment, that I would willingly thread the next reel, that I would surrender to the story, that I would give it the director's role in my own final tragic scene. Its awareness was not just a passive observation, it was an active, intelligent campaign to weaken my will. One evening, as Clara was making tea in the small kitchen, a more overt manifestation occurred. A heavy antique cookbook on a high shelf suddenly flew across the room, its pages fluttering wildly before crashing against the far wall with a sickening thud. There was no draft, no vibration. It was a clear, deliberate act of kinetic force, an undeniable display of physical power that left us both speechless, trembling. Clara's attempts at rationalization, already worn thin, finally crumbled completely. "Okay," she breathed, her eyes wide with terror. "Okay, this is real. This is happening." Her belief, though born of shared fear, was a small, cold comfort. We were in this together now, two frightened women against an ancient, unknowable entity that could move objects and warp reflections. Then, as if in response to our shared terror, one of the watchers appeared. It didn't flicker at the edge of our vision. It solidified at the far end of the hallway. A tall, impossibly thin silhouette of pure, featureless black, darker than any shadow. It simply stood there, motionless, observing us with an unnerving, almost curious, stillness. It was no longer hiding, no longer flitting. It was revealing itself, asserting its presence, its dominion over this space. We stood frozen, unable to scream, unable to move, our breath caught in our throats. The figure remained for what felt like an eternity, perhaps only 10 seconds. A silent, terrifying statue of pure dread. The air in the apartment grew intensely cold, the electrical hum from the walls rising to a high-pitched, almost painful whine. The entity was demonstrating its power, showing us that it could manifest physically whenever it chose. Then, as slowly and silently as it had appeared, the figure seemed to dissolve, not vanishing in a blink, but fading, thinning, becoming translucent until it was nothing more than a faint distortion in the air. And then, it was gone. The coldness receded, the hum subsided, leaving us in a silence that felt more profound, more terrifying than any sound. We were no longer just being haunted by the echoes of a film. We were being occupied by its inhabitants. The watchers were, here in my home, semi-physical entities with a clear, malevolent intent. Mr. Elias's warnings about a jailer had been an understatement. This was not just a memory trap. It was an invasive force, and its prisoners were now walking the halls of my own reality. Clara and I huddled together on the couch, the rest of the night a sleepless vigil. We knew, with a certainty that left no room for doubt, that we could not simply wait for the entity to make its next move. Covering the projector was no longer enough. The connection had been forged, the doorway opened, and the watchers were now on this side of the veil. We had to understand the films, the projector, the nature of the curse, not just to satisfy my archivist's curiosity, but as a matter of survival. The entity's awareness had become a direct, personal, and increasingly physical threat. We had to find a way to fight back, to close the portal before it, or its shadowy jailers, decided that the time for psychological torment was over and the time for a more permanent, more physical ending had begun. The lingering presence of the Watcher, its silent, menacing form having solidified in our hallway, had shattered our last illusions of safety. Clara and I spent the rest of that terrible night huddled together on the couch, the blanket-shrouded projector a dark altar in the corner of the room. We knew we could no longer be passive victims, cowering from the shadows. The rusted tin of films, once a source of terror, was now our only potential source of answers. our only hope of understanding the nature of the curse we had unleashed. When the first gray, rain-swept light of dawn filtered through the windows, we approached the workbench with a shared grim resolve. The fear was still there, a cold, metallic taste in the back of my throat, but it was now tempered by a desperate, analytical curiosity. If we were to fight this, we needed to understand its origins, its history. The story, we knew, must lie, not just in the films themselves, but in the vessel that contained them. With careful, almost reverent hands, we began to meticulously examine the rusted metal film tin. Its surface was a testament to decades of neglect, the painted label long since corroded into an unreadable brownish smudge. We had overlooked its container in our initial excitement and subsequent horror, focusing only on the reels within. But now, every dent, every scratch, every patch of rust seemed like a potential clue, a piece of a forgotten, sorrowful puzzle. Clara, her eyes sharper than mine in her renewed, albeit frightened focus, was the one who found it. On the corroded, dented bottom of the tin, nearly invisible against the dark patina of age, were faint, hand-scratched letters, etched into the metal with what must have been a pin or a knife tip. We angled the tin under the lamplight, our heads close together, trying to decipher the faint, desperate script. Slowly, the words emerged from the rust and grime, a chilling, spectral message from the past. The Holloway family, Summerlin Drive, 1957, God help us. Holloway, the name I had glimpsed on the birthday banner in the second film. Now, we had a name, a location, a date. It was a concrete lead, a thread to pull in this tangled, terrifying web. The final, desperate plea, God help us, sent a fresh shiver of dread through us both. Armed with this new information, my archivist instincts took over, providing a fragile shield against my overwhelming fear. I turned to my laptop, its screen no longer a portal for torment, but a tool for investigation. While Clara kept a nervous watch on the shrouded projector, I began to search Oak Haven's digital newspaper archives, my fingers flying across the keyboard, typing in the new search terms. Holloway, Summerlin Drive, 1957. The results were immediate and horrifying. A series of articles from the winter of 1957 detailed the strange, unsolved disappearance of the entire Holloway family, Arthur, Eleanor, and their two children, Lily and Thomas. They had vanished from their suburban home without a trace, leaving behind a half-eaten dinner on the table, Christmas presents partially wrapped in the living room, and no sign of any struggle or forced entry. The case had been a local sensation, then a chilling, forgotten legend. The articles spoke of the police being baffled, of no leads, no suspects, no logical explanation. Neighbors had reported strange, flickering lights emanating from the Holloway home in the weeks leading up to their disappearance. And one even mentioned the family's increasing reclusiveness. Their father, Arthur, having boarded up several windows for reasons of privacy, an act the journalist noted as deeply peculiar. It was all there, a perfect, chilling mirror of the silent films I had watched. The happy family, their growing paranoia, the father's desperate attempts to barricade his home, all culminating in their utter, inexplicable vanishing. The films were not just a record of their lives. They were a record of their final days, their final terrifying moments before they were... what? Taken? Consumed? The question hung in the air, cold and sharp. But what did it mean? What was the connection between their disappearance and the projector? Desperate for more insight, for the esoteric knowledge that went beyond simple newspaper. Archives. I knew I had to contact Mr. Elias again. He had known about the Holloway estate. He knew more than he had told us. His riddle about the director and the ending of the film felt more crucial, more urgent than ever. I found the number for his antique shop in an old, dusty business directory, my hands shaking as I dialed. He answered on the first ring, his reedy, whispering voice instantly recognizable. When I spoke the name Holloway, a long, heavy silence stretched across the line, a silence filled with unspoken knowledge and ancient dread. "So," he finally murmured, "you have uncovered the heart of the matter. I had hoped you would be wise enough to let it lie." "Mr. Elias, please," I pleaded. "You have to help us. What is this projector? Why the Holloways? What happened to them?" I could almost hear him sigh on the other end of the line, a sound like dry, crumbling paper. "Some devices, child," he said slowly, his voice a low, cautionary tale, "are more than just machines. They are prisons. The camera that filmed the Holloways, it was not designed just to capture their light, their image. It was designed to capture their essence. It trapped them," he continued, his words painting a horrifying picture, imprinting their final, fear-soaked moments onto the celluloid, their souls bound to the film, forced to relive their terror in an endless, silent loop. The watcher, the jailer, feeds on this loop. It is its sustenance, and the projector is the key to their prison, and the doorway for the jailer to peer out, to seek new stories, new nourishment. A wave of nausea washed over me. The Holloway family was still in there, trapped in those reels, their terror a perpetual feast for the shadowy entity. "But Mr. Elias," I stammered, "you said something else. You said some cameras don't just trap, they replace." Another long, heavy silence from his end of the line. The rain began to patter against my window, a soft, sorrowful rhythm. "Yes," he finally whispered, his voice barely audible, filled with a profound gravity. "That is the cruelest part of this particular device's curse. It is not just a prison, it is an exchange. It seeks equilibrium. For a story to be completed, for a new soul to be fully recorded, an old one, or the space it occupied, must sometimes be vacated. The camera steals the subject, and the projector, in turn, can sometimes project a replacement." My mind reeled, struggling to comprehend the horrifying implications. Replacement? An exchange? What did that mean? Was the entity trying to project the Holloways into my world? Or was it trying to project me into theirs, to make me a permanent part of their tragic, endlessly looping film? The vagueness of his warning was somehow more terrifying than any direct threat could have been. Before I could ask more, he spoke again, his voice urgent. "Listen to me, child. The most dangerous reel is the last one, the blank one. It is not for viewing. It is for imprinting. The jailer will try to trick you, to force you, to project your own story, your own terror, onto that final empty frame. If that happens, your own echo will be trapped, and the story of the Holloways will be complete." His words hit me with the force of a physical blow. The blank reel. It wasn't just an unused piece of film. It was a vacancy, a space waiting to be filled, a terrible, final chapter waiting to be written with my own soul as the ink. The entity wasn't just trying to haunt me. It was trying to replace me, to make me the star of its newest, most terrifying production. With a final chilling piece of advice, do not let it direct your final scene, child. You must find a way to become the director yourself. Mr. Elias hung up, leaving me in a stunned, horrified silence. Clara looked at me, her face pale, having overheard my side of the dreadful conversation. We now knew the full, horrifying scope of the threat we faced. The projector, shrouded in its blanket, seemed to pulse with a new, more sinister energy. It was a prison, a doorway, and a weapon of soul replacement, all at once. And the blank reel, tucked away in its rusted tin, was a loaded gun, pointed directly at my heart, at my very existence. The story in the tin was not just the Holloways. It was a warning, a prophecy of my own potential. Horrifying fate. Mr. Elias's final chilling words about replacement and the danger of the blank reel hung in the air between Clara and me. A poisonous, suffocating fog that was far more terrifying than the relentless rain outside. The projector, still, shrouded in its blanket, now seemed less like a haunted artifact and more like an executioner's block, patiently awaiting its next victim. The story of the Holloway family was no longer a tragedy to be observed. It was a vacancy to be filled, and my own soul was the designated replacement. We spent hours in a state of terrified paralysis, the city of Oakhaven outside our window dissolving into a blur of wet, indifferent darkness. Every creak of the old building, every gust of wind, every distant siren seemed like a prelude to some new horror, a sign that the watcher was growing impatient. We were two prisoners in a brightly lit cell, with the instrument of our potential, Doom, sitting silently in the corner of the room, radiating a cold, ancient menace. It was Clara who finally broke the spell, her voice a shaky but resolute whisper. "We have to look, Alice," she said, her gaze fixed on the rusted film tin on the workbench. "We have to know for sure. We have to see the blank reel he warned us about." Her courage, born of shared terror, was a small, fragile flame, but it was enough to ignite my own. We had to confront the full scope of the threat, however horrifying. With a shared, trembling breath, we approached the workbench. I lifted the rusted lid of the film tin, the metal cool and slightly gritty beneath my fingertips. Inside, the small metal reels of the Holloway family's life lay nestled together, their celluloid strips holding a silent, looped eternity of fear and sorrow. Carefully, I began to remove them one by one, counting them, my hands shaking so badly that Clara had to steady them with her own. There were 11 developed reels in total, each one aged, slightly brittle, giving off that faint, almost sweet scent of old film stock, and something else, something sadder. And then, at the very bottom of the tin, lay the 12th reel. The moment I saw it, a profound, unnatural chill swept through the room, a coldness that seemed to emanate directly from the object itself. It was different from the others, unnervingly so. Where the other reels were tarnished with age, their metal slightly corroded, their film stock bearing the faint chemical patina of time, this last reel was pristine, almost new. Its metal shone with a dull, clean luster, and the film wound around its core was a perfect, glossy, unblemished black. It was utterly, terrifyingly blank. Not a single frame had been exposed. It was a void, a perfect, waiting emptiness. Mr. Elias's words slammed into my mind with the force of a physical blow. The blank one. It is not for viewing. It is for imprinting. This was not just a collection of found footage. It was an incomplete set, a story with a final, terrible chapter waiting to be written. The Holloway family's tragedy was the prelude. Their captured souls the bait, and this pristine blank reel was the final page, waiting for its subject. And that subject, I knew with a certainty that left no room for doubt, was me, my fascination, my empathy, my archivist's need to see the story through to its end. These were the qualities the entity, the watcher, had sought. It had drawn me in, shown me the family's terror, made me a participant in their sorrow, all to prepare me, to attune me, to make me a worthy subject for its final, terrible recording. With this new, horrifying understanding, we turned our attention back to the projector itself, searching for the mechanism Elias had hinted at, the part that made it not just a playback device, but a recorder. On its side, almost hidden amongst the intricate scrollwork, was a small, unmarked switch we had previously overlooked, and beside the main projection lens was another, smaller, darker lens, one that didn't seem designed to emit light, but to capture it. It was a camera, a recording device, built into the very fabric of the projector. It was a monstrous, ingenious design, a machine that could simultaneously project a past tragedy while recording a new one, perhaps even using the emotional energy of the viewer, their fear and empathy, to power the imprinting process. The serpentine knot motif engraved on its casing seemed to mock us, an endless, inescapable loop. "We have to destroy it, Alice," Clara whispered, her voice tight with a mixture of fear and defiance. "Smash it. Burn the films. We have to break the curse." But I hesitated, my mind filled with Elias's cryptic warning. Every film must have an ending. The question is, who gets to be the director? What would happen if we simply destroyed it? Would that free the Holloways? Or would it simply trap their echoes, and perhaps the Watcher itself, in our world forever? As we stood there, paralyzed by indecision, a new sound began to fill the apartment, soft at first, then growing in volume. It was the projector. It had started whirring on its own again, its motor a low, hungry growl, even though its power cord remained coiled on the floor, far from any outlet. The blanket we had thrown over it began to smolder, a thin wisp of acrid smoke rising from its surface. With a shared cry of alarm, we backed away. The projector's main lamp began to glow, not with the warm, flickering light of before, but with a harsh, cold, clinical white light, a light that seemed to bleach all color from the room, to suck all warmth from the air. And the smaller, darker lens, the recording lens, began to emit a faint, hungry red glow, like the single malevolent eye of some terrible ancient insect. The blank reel, still sitting in its open tin on the workbench, began to vibrate, to hum, a low, resonant frequency that made my teeth ache. It was as if the projector were calling to it, summoning it, preparing to thread it into its monstrous waiting mechanism. The Watchers, the jailers of the Holloway family, were preparing to create their new masterpiece. The shadows in the room deepened, coalesced, their forms more solid, more defined than ever before. They pressed in from the corners, tall, thin, featureless silhouettes of pure blackness, their presence a suffocating weight. And from the projector, the disembodied composite voice of the entity whispered, its tone no longer seductive, but a flat, cold command. "The final scene, Alice. It is time to record your fear." An immense, unseen pressure began to build in the room, forcing the air from my lungs, making it difficult to breathe, to think. It was a psychic force, an attempt to pin me down, to make me a helpless subject for its final, terrible frame. The red light from the recording lens intensified, its hungry gaze fixed upon me, and I felt my own memories, my own essence, being tugged at, drawn towards the waiting, empty reel. Clara screamed, a raw, terrified sound that seemed to break the initial paralysis that had gripped us. "Alice, do something!" she cried, her own face a mask of terror. She was right. Elias's words returned to me, not as a riddle, but as a call to action. Every film needs an ending. Who gets to be the director? The entity had cast me as its tragic star, but I refused to play the part. My terror, still immense, was now joined by a surge of furious, defiant anger. It would not have me. It would not have my fear, my memories, my soul, to add to its collection of sorrowful, endlessly looping nightmares. I was not just a viewer, not just a victim. I was an archivist. I understood the medium, and I would not let it write my ending. With a cry of my own, a sound of pure, unadulterated defiance, I lunged not away from the projector, but towards it. The watchers, the shadowy figures, seemed to recoil in surprise at my unexpected aggression. The red light from the recording lens flared, as if in anger, but I did not stop. If this was to be the final scene, I would be the one to direct it, one way or another. The battle for my soul had begun. My defiant cry was swallowed by the hungry whir of the projector and the rising shriek of the wind outside. The shadowy watchers, momentarily startled by my aggressive lunge, immediately reformed, their featureless silhouettes turning towards me with a unified, menacing focus. The red light from the recording lens intensified, its psychic pull a tangible force, trying to dredge up my deepest fears, to render me helpless, to make me a passive subject for its final, terrible film. This was no longer a haunting. It was a harvest. A battle of wills began in the heart of my small, storm-battered apartment. The entity threw illusions at me with a furious, desperate intensity. I saw the terrified faces of the Holloway family superimposed over Clara's, their silent screams a constant torment. The walls of my apartment seemed to melt away, replaced by the decaying claustrophobic rooms of their haunted house. The scent of ozone and old, bitter sorrows filled the air, a psychic assault designed to break me, to make me surrender to the fear it craved. Clara, though pale with a terror I could only imagine, became my anchor to reality. When a vision of my own past failures, my most shameful moments, began to overwhelm me, her voice cut through the illusion. "Alice, it's not real. Don't look. Fight it." Her presence, her belief, was a small, defiant spark of warmth against the entity's all-consuming cold, a reminder of the world I was fighting for, the life I refused to have erased and recorded. Over. The watchers, however, were relentless, their shadowy forms gliding closer, their presence draining the warmth from the room, their collective whispers a venomous chorus in my mind, mocking my resistance, promising the inevitable, peaceful oblivion of the blank reel. They were extensions of the projector's will, spectral sheepdogs herding a terrified, recalcitrant lamb towards the slaughter, their movements fluid, unnatural, and utterly without pity. Then, as if summoned by the rising chaos within my apartment, the storm outside unleashed its full apocalyptic fury. A deafening crack of thunder, so loud it shook the very foundations of the building, was followed by a blinding flash of lightning that bleached the world white for a terrifying instant. And with that flash, every light in my apartment, every Light in the city block, visible from my window, extinguished. We were plunged into an absolute suffocating darkness. The blackout was total. The only light remaining was the projector's own unnatural, hungry red glow from its recording lens, and the faint, almost imperceptible warmth from the mother-of-pearl button I still clutched. The darkness, however, was not empty. It seemed to give the watchers substance, to feed them. In the next flash of lightning from the storm outside, I saw them clearly, no longer just shadows, but tangible, writhing figures of pure, solidified darkness. Their forms vaguely human, but impossibly tall, their limbs elongated and jointed all wrong. The projector, which had been running on some unseen power, now began to whir with a new, higher-pitched intensity, a sound like a dentist's drill against a raw nerve. The blank reel, which had been vibrating in its tin, levitated slowly into the air, drawn by an invisible force, and began to thread itself into the machine's weighting mechanism with a series of horrifying, precise clicks. The final summons was here. The recording was about to begin. A wave of utter despair washed over me. We were trapped in the dark, with these solidified nightmares, and the cursed machine was preparing to fulfill its terrible purpose. The psychic pull on my mind intensified tenfold. A direct, irresistible command to be still, to surrender, to offer up my fear, my memories, my very essence, to be imprinted onto the waiting celluloid. I could feel my own consciousness beginning to fray at the edges. It was Clara's scream that saved me. One of the solidified watchers had glided towards her, its form momentarily blocking the projector's red glow. In that instant of shared, immediate peril, my focus shifted from my own terror to a fierce, protective rage. This entity would not take her. It would not take anyone else. I remembered Mr. Elias's final cryptic riddle. Every film needs an ending. Who gets to be the director? I would not be the star of this horror film. I would be its unwilling but defiant director. I knew I couldn't overpower the entity with will alone. I had to disrupt the process, to break the machine, to give it an ending it did not expect. My eyes darted around the darkened room, searching for a weapon, for a tool, for anything. My gaze fell upon the other reels of film, the silent, tragic lives of the Holloway family, still sitting on my workbench. The projector wanted a new story. My story. What if I gave it an old one instead? What if I forced it to look back at itself, to confront the very sorrow it was trying to endlessly replicate? It was an insane, desperate gamble, a thought born of pure adrenaline-fueled intuition. The machine was trying to record. What would happen if I forced it to play at the same time? With a defiant cry, I lunged for the workbench, grabbing one of the Holloway's film reels, the one of the birthday party, the one that had held so much corrupted joy. The watchers turned towards me, their movements surprisingly fast. But Clara, seeing my intent, threw a heavy book at the nearest one, causing it to momentarily dissipate into a cloud of swirling shadow, giving me the precious second I needed, scrambled towards the whirring projector, the red recording light searing, the psychic pressure immense. Ignoring the machine's hungry pull, I bypassed its self-threading mechanism, and with a desperate, forceful shove, jammed the old 8mm reel of the Holloway's birthday party directly into the projector's gate, forcing it into the path of the recording lens. The effect was immediate and catastrophic. The projector shrieked, a sound of tearing metal and tortured electronics. The red recording light and the white projection lamp flared simultaneously, creating a blinding, unstable feedback loop. The image of the Holloway's joyful birthday party, now distorted and grotesque, flashed on the wall, overlaid with a screaming, swirling vortex of static, and the enraged faces of the watchers. The projector was trying to both play a memory and record a new one onto the same stream, and the paradox was tearing it apart. The psychic energy in the room became a physical force, a concussive wave that threw both Clara and me back against the far wall. The watchers shrieked, their solidified forms flickering violently, their shadowy substance unable to hold its shape in the face of this chaotic, contradictory energy. The air crackled, the scent of ozone and burning celluloid filling the room. The projector began to shake violently on the workbench, its whirring reaching an impossible, agonizing pitch. The images on the wall became a blur of screaming faces, happy memories, and swirling, angry shadows, a war between the trapped souls of the Holloways and the parasitic entity that had imprisoned them. Then, with a final, deafening bang that sounded like a thunderclap inside our very skulls, the projector exploded. A wave of pure white light, brighter than any lightning, filled the apartment for a heart-stopping instant. And then, absolute darkness. Absolute silence. The only sound was the soft, gentle patter of the rain outside, its fury finally, truly, spent. Slowly, painfully, I pushed myself up, my ears ringing, my body aching. The emergency lights of the apartment building flickered on, casting a dim, steady glow over the scene of devastation. The projector was a mangled, smoking wreck. The borrower tin of films had been blown open, its contents a tangled, melted ruin on the floor, and the watchers, its shadowy figures, were gone. The oppressive, watchful presence that had haunted me for weeks was gone. The air felt light, clean, blessedly empty. Clara was huddled in the corner, shaken but unharmed. We had done it. We had faced the entity, broken its prison, and somehow, impossibly, we had survived. The storm was over, both outside and in, but the echoes of its fury, I knew, would remain. The silence that descended upon my apartment in the aftermath of the projector's violent demise was more profound than any I had ever experienced. It was not the oppressive, watchful silence of the entity, but a true, blessedly empty quiet. The only sounds were Clara's shuddering breaths and my own, the distant patter of the now gentle rain, and the faint, almost apologetic ticking of my kitchen clock, reclaiming its small authority in a world momentarily ripped apart. The storm was over. We had survived. In the dim, steady glow of the building's restored emergency lights, we slowly, painfully, picked ourselves up from the floor. The room was a scene of devastation. A black scorch mark marred the wall where the projector's light had been focused, and the air was thick with the acrid stench of burned plastic and ozone. The projector itself was a mangled, smoking heap of metal and shattered glass. Its malevolent eye now dark, its hungry whir silenced forever. Clara and I moved through the wreckage like survivors of a shipwreck, our movements clumsy, our minds struggling to process the shift from absolute terror to the strange, fragile calm. We swept up the shards of the Holloway family's celluloid lives, their silent, looping tragedy now just a pile of melted, blackened ruin. It felt like a desecration, but also, I prayed, a release. The deep, physical scratches on my apartment door remained, a stark, ugly scar on the mundane wood, the only clear physical evidence of our ordeal. In the days that followed, a fragile sense of normalcy began to return, yet everything was subtly, irrevocably altered. The oppressive silence of my apartment was gone, replaced by the familiar, comforting sounds of the city, the distant traffic, the murmur of my neighbors, the sigh of the wind. Yet, sometimes, in moments of deep quiet, I would think I heard a faint phantom whirring, an echo of the projector's motor imprinted not on the air, but on my own memory. I became jumpy, startled by shadows, my eyes constantly drawn to reflective surfaces, half expecting to see a face that was not my own. Staring back at me, the city of Oakhaven, once my beloved subject, now felt like a place of hidden, sleeping dangers. I found I could no longer look at an abandoned building, a forgotten alleyway, without a flicker of the old dread, without wondering what sorrows, what entities might lie dormant within. While carefully cleaning the last of the debris from the workbench, my fingers brushed against something small and sharp beneath the wreckage. It was a single scorched frame of 8mm film, miraculously intact, blown clear of the main destruction. It was from the Holloway's picnic, a distorted, heat-warped image of the mother, her face blurred, but her eyes somehow seeming to hold a faint, spectral glimmer of gratitude before the image faded completely into the scorched celluloid. I kept that single ruined frame, a private memento of the family I had come to know in the most terrifyingly intimate way possible. They were gone, their loop broken, but I would not let them be entirely forgotten. Their story, their silent warning, was now a part of my own, a heavy but necessary piece of baggage that I would carry with me for the rest of my days. Clara stayed with me for a week, a comforting, grounding presence in the aftermath. We spoke little of the events of that final, terrible night, the horror still too raw, too unbelievable to be easily shaped by words. But a new, unspoken bond had been forged between us, the shared knowledge of a reality that lay just beneath the surface of our own, a reality of watchers in the dark and stories that could kill. When the time came for her to leave, her concern for me was still palpable. "Are you sure you'll be okay here, Alice?" she asked, her eyes searching mine. "Maybe you should move. Leave this place, this city behind." I understood her fear, her desire to put as much distance as possible between us and the nightmare we had shared. But I knew, with a certainty that settled deep in my bones, that running was no longer an option for me. "I can't run from it, Clara," I told her, my voice quiet but firm. "It's a part of what I know now, but it doesn't own me. I won't let it." Our farewell was heavy with unspoken fears, but also with a new shared strength. She was the witness, who kept me sane, and I was the archivist who held the terrible, unbelievable truth. We had faced the abyss together, and that had changed everything. After Clara left, a new kind of quiet settled over the apartment, one of my own choosing. The space felt truly mine for the first time, cleansed by fire and light, its previous, spectral tenant evicted. Yet I knew the victory was not absolute. The entity, the Watcher, was a creature of Oakhaven, a part of its forgotten soul. I had destroyed its gateway, its prison, but had I destroyed the jailer itself? Or had I merely forced it to retreat, to find other windows, other forgotten objects? Weeks later, I picked up my own camera again, its familiar weight both a comfort and a source of apprehension. I needed to know if my perception of the world had been permanently altered, if my lens, like my own eyes, now saw things that others did not. I walked the city streets, not seeking decay this time, but simply observing the mundane flow of everyday life, and I began to take pictures. The results were subtle, yet undeniable. In the reflection of a bus window, a faint, almost invisible distortion lingered where a shadow should not be. In a photograph of an old historic building, a strange symbolic pattern, reminiscent of the projector's serpentine knot, seemed to be faintly visible in the intricate brickwork. My camera could still see the echoes, the faint resonance of the city's hidden life, a perception that I was now, it seemed, permanently attuned to. This new sight was not terrifying, not anymore. It was simply a fact, a layer of reality that had been peeled back, revealing the complex, sometimes sorrowful, sometimes beautiful, and sometimes menacing undercurrents that flowed beneath the surface of the world. It was a heavy knowledge to carry, a lonely perception to possess, but it was mine. It was the price of my survival. One rainy evening, while walking past a darkened shop front, I glanced at my reflection. There I was, pale, tired, but undeniably myself. But for a fleeting, heart-stopping instant, in the deepest part of the shadow I cast on the wet pavement behind me, I thought I saw it. The tall, thin, featureless silhouette of a watcher, a permanent, silent companion, an echo that was now inextricably part of my own story. I didn't scream. I didn't run. I simply met its gaze in the reflection, held it for a long moment, and then, with a quiet sense of resolve, I turned and continued walking. The entity had not consumed me, had not replaced me, but it had left its mark, its ineradicable stain, a permanent shadow on my soul. I was the one who had escaped its film, yet a single final frame would now be a part of me forever. My work as an archivist of lost films took on a new meaning. I became a different kind of curator, one who understood the profound power of images, the way they could hold not just memories but presences, the way they could become windows to other darker worlds. I dedicated myself to finding other such artifacts, not to watch them, but to understand them, to ensure their stories remained silent, their gateways firmly closed. The projector had been a curse, a terrifying conduit of fear and despair. But in surviving it, in becoming its unwilling director, I had found a new, strange purpose. My fascination with the past had not diminished, but it was now tempered with a profound, weary wisdom. I knew now that some forgotten things are forgotten for a reason, that some doors are best left unopened. And sometimes on a rainy night in Oakhaven, when the city is quiet and the air is thick with memory, I still feel a faint, familiar hum in the walls, a whisper in the static. But I no longer fear it. I simply acknowledge it. A quiet nod to the city's vast, unseen heart, to its countless sleeping stories, and to the eternal, inescapable echo of the watchers in the frame. The projector's ghost now sleeps in shattered glass, its hungry whir, a memory of dread. The Holloway's final, silent moments pass from tortured loop to quiet in my head. The tin is scoured, the celluloid is dust, the blank reel's promise has been rendered null. And in my small apartment's fragile trust, the air is clean, the shadows have grown dull. But when the rain, a soft and silver thread, draws shifting portraits on my window pane, I see the world through the eyes of the dead and feel the echo of their captured pain. My camera's lens, once innocent and keen, now finds the static in the sunlit air, the watcher's faint persistence in a scene, a fragile warning woven everywhere. My own reflection holds a second gaze, a shadow tethered, slender, dark, and deep. It does not haunt me through these quiet days, but shares the solemn secrets that I keep. I was the audience, the final star, the one who broke the cycle and the light. And in my soul, I hold a single scar, a single frame from their unending night. So let me be the archivist of fear, the careful keeper of the things that see, to ensure no one else must ever hear. A story that desires to be unfree. The film is over, and the reel is done. The final credits of my terror roll. But in the eye, rising of the morning sun, I am the keeper of a captured soul.